The ancient city of Jerusalem. It could easily stand as a symbol of all three religions, for it is sacred to each one of them. The revealed religions have many features in common. Central to each is the worship of a single deity, be he called Jehovah, God, or Allah. Many figures, such as the patriarchs Noah, Moses, and Abraham, occupy a revered place in all three. For just as Christians accept the Old Testament, so Muslims consider the Jewish and Christian religions to be earlier but imperfect revelations. They believe Islam to be the final, perfect faith. To the Jews, Jerusalem is sacred as their ancient capital. This, the Western Wall, is one of the holiest of Jewish shrines, and it is believed to be part of the retaining wall for the temple, first erected by Solomon and later rebuilt by King Herod, which housed the Ark of the Covenant. And here the Jews still come to pray and worship. To the Christians, Jerusalem is the city where Jesus taught. Here in the Garden of Gethsemane, among these ancient olive trees, he spent a night in prayer, and it was here that he was betrayed to his enemies. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre stands on the traditional site of his crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. With Mecca and Medina, Jerusalem is one of the three places most sacred to Islam. Here is found the Al-Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary. In it stands the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The name means the farthest, for it once was the most distant from Mecca. Within the same sanctuary is another great mosque, the Dome of the Rock. In the Quran, the Muslim Bible, it is written, "Glory to God who did take his servant for a journey by night to the farthest mosque in order that we might show him some of our signs." Muslims believe that the Prophet was miraculously transported one night from Mecca here to Jerusalem on the back of his horse, Al-Buraq. Note that in these pictures of the Prophet, his face is veiled. There he prayed, together with the spirits of ancient patriarchs, Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, and Jesus, all figures revered by both Islam and Christianity. This was the cavern where they were said to have met. It lies below a massive rock. Tradition has it that it was on this great stone slab that Abraham prepared to sacrifice his son. And Muslims believe it is from the same rock that Muhammad miraculously ascended to paradise, returning to Mecca by the following dawn. All these paintings are from a 16th century Persian manuscript. 1,300 years ago, the Dome of the Rock was built to commemorate this site, the third most holy in all Islam. It is one of the architectural wonders of the world. Islam forbids the making of holy images. That is why the paintings show Muhammad with his face veiled. But the Orthodox go much further and frown on all representational art. So Islamic decoration is mainly concerned with geometrical patterns and very beautiful refined variations of Arabic script. In Muslim eyes, this great mosque, dominating the skyline of Jerusalem, symbolizes the triumph of Islam. Let us go back to the time before the birth of Muhammad. The Arabia of that period was an isolated region, cut off on three sides by seas, surrounded by powerful and long-established neighbors. Much of Arabia was a desert waste, sparsely inhabited by the Bedouin, nomadic tribes following the thin traces of vegetation from which their herds of sheep and goats were able to gain the barest sustenance. Camel caravans traveling early or late to avoid the fierce heat of the day crossed the desert on their way to the few settlements. One of the biggest of these was Mecca, in present-day Saudi Arabia, a town of many merchants who traded between the east, the ports of southern Arabia, and the cities of Byzantium and Persia. Long before the time of the Prophet, Mecca had been a well-known center of pilgrimage. Pagan worshippers came to visit the Kaaba, a simple black cube traditionally believed to have been built by the patriarch Abraham. The Prophet Muhammad was born here in Mecca in 570 A.D. It was in his 40th year that he experienced his divine revelations, and at once he began to preach against the practices of idolatry and paganism. But his fellow townsmen, who believed he was threatening both their religious and commercial interests, violently opposed his teaching. He and his followers experienced a period of persecution, and he was lucky to escape with his life to the town of Yathrib. This flight is called by Muslims the Hejira, and it is from this date that the Muslim calendar begins. To honor the town that gave them refuge, the Muslims renamed it Medina, the Arab word for city. The Prophet's disciples grew steadily in strength and numbers, and at Medina the first Islamic state was established. After 8 years, Muhammad was strong enough to be able to return in triumph to Mecca. These illustrations of the two cities are from old Islamic manuscripts. In Mecca, Muhammad cleansed the Kaaba of its pagan idols and made it the holiest shrine of Islam. From that time to the present day, it has been the focus of the Islamic faith and of the Hajj, the annual Muslim pilgrimage. Every Muslim attempts to perform the Hajj at least once in his lifetime. On arrival at Mecca, the pilgrims carry out a whole series of prescribed rituals. They must also offer a sacrifice of a sheep, goat, or camel, depending on their wealth. These are scenes of the Great Mosque at Mecca and of the Hajj pilgrims circling the Kaaba. All must wear a simple white garment, symbolizing their equality before Allah. Only 2 years after his return to Mecca, the Prophet died at the age of 62. His tomb is in Medina. His swords and his bow rest in the Topkapı Palace at Istanbul. After his death, a caliph or successor was appointed. His duties were both to guard the Islamic faith and to govern the empire according to Quranic law. For in traditional Islam, there is no division into religious and temporal spheres, such as exist in Christian states. The first caliph was a companion of the Prophet, Abu Bakr. His sword is also in the Topkapı Palace. Over the centuries, climatic conditions in the Arabian Peninsula had been worsening. Overgrazing of the scanty vegetation by the herds of the nomadic tribes had steadily destroyed what plant life there was, so there had always been some migration outwards to other lands. But after the death of the Prophet, the Arab world was to expand at lightning speed. Disputes and incursions by her great and powerful neighbors were always a feature of life on the frontiers of Arabia. This is a reconstruction of one particular battle with Byzantium, the eastern half of the old Roman Empire. But now the Arabs, inspired by religious fervor, were fighting for the cause of Islam. Within 20 years, the Muslims had wrested from the Byzantine Empire the provinces which today are known as Palestine, Syria, Egypt, Libya, Iraq, and Iran. Arab armies had reached the borders of India. How did they manage it? Partly it was the impact of the Arab cavalry, superb horsemen. Also, the Byzantines and the Persians were exhausted by years of wars with each other and by their own internal dissensions. And because the subject people in these old empires owed no loyalty to their rulers, they would not fight for them. But it was mainly due to the inspiration and missionary quality of the new faith. 25 years after Muhammad's death, a major rift appeared in the Islamic world. The Caliph Ottoman was assassinated, and to succeed him, one party elected Ali, son-in-law of the Prophet. This 16th century painting shows notables swearing allegiance to Ali. But a second faction, led by the merchant clans of Medina and Damascus, chose one of their own leaders, Muawiyah, as caliph. For a while, civil war raged between the two caliphates. 4 years later, Ali was assassinated in the mosque at Kufa in modern Iraq, and his supporters were dispersed. In Najaf, a town close by, a mosque stands dedicated to his memory. With Ali's death, the civil war was ended. And so from 661 AD, the empire was ruled from the ancient city of Damascus in Syria. The Caliph Muawiyah was the first of what was to be the great Umayyad dynasty, for the caliphate was to become dynastic, handed down from father to son. But when Muawiyah himself died, troubles over the succession flared up once more. Hussein, the son of Ali, was proposed as a candidate for the caliphate and was invited to visit Kufa. But on the way, he and his small party were ambushed near the town of Karbala. This, too, is in modern Iraq. And with the exception of one sick child, all were killed. This is Hussein's mosque at Karbala. Within it, inside an ornately decorated tomb, is his body. The circumstances and brutality of these murders caused an intense reaction against the Umayyad Caliphate of Damascus. It was the beginning of the great division in the Muslim world, which persists to this very day between the Shiites, descendants of those who supported Ali and his family, and the rest of the Muslims, who are known as Sunnis. In very general terms, it can be said that the Shiite faction tends to be more idealistic and concerned with fundamental principles, the Sunnis more practical and realistic. Nevertheless, with the Umayyad dynasty once again in full control, the expansion of the empire resumed at a fantastic speed, often fueled by conversions to the Islamic faith. North Africa was finally conquered, the Berber tribes accepting Islam. In the east, the Arabs occupied Samarkand, Bukhara, and Kabul. The conquest of almost the whole of Spain took just 1 year. At the same time, the Arabs crossed the China frontier and entered what is present-day Pakistan. 6 years later, Arab armies crossed the Pyrenees and southwestern France was invaded. But at Poitiers, their progress was barred by the Christian armies. The invasion of France was abandoned. The Arabs had at last reached the limit of their expansion. At that time, theirs was the greatest empire the world had ever seen.